how they kind of fit into the game, how to deploy them, and how to think about them in a kind of useful and productive way. Um, and the way that I personally think about ARO pieces is using a categorization system. And the categorization system is either soft, medium, or hard, depending on the kind of level of board control and risk they expose themselves to. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So I will talk about this a little bit more in detail. So before we dive into specifics, I think it's most important um, to kind of define what our goals are for an ARO piece and how that might change throughout the game. So I think one of the critical mistakes that a lot of newer players make that I've seen quite a lot is that they think that they need to set up a lot of AROs. That's the first thing, lots of them. And the second thing is that the goal of an ARO piece is to kill enemy troops, so it's to remove opposing pieces. Um, but I think the perspective of people that have been playing this game for a long time is that you start to realize that there's obviously a huge power imbalance between active turn pieces and reactive pieces, right? Um,
Oh, huge.
right, because your active turn pieces are shooting with burst 3, 4, 5, even 6 in like one or two cases. And your reactive piece is usually on 1, sometimes 4 if you've got a TR bot like this one here, but mostly 1. And so, with that being said, the chance of you actually scoring a kill on an enemy troop is quite low. Um, and therefore, you need to shift the goalposts for what you expect an ARO piece to do slightly. And what I mean by that is, instead of expecting an ARO piece to kill your opponent's troop, it can be more useful to think about how much time they waste. Does that make sense as a shift?
Basically, making them spend extra orders.
Right, exactly that. So, one of the ways that I think about it, just to make it clear, is that, if your opponent rocks up to a game and they've got 15 orders in total, right? So let's say 10 in the first group and 5 in the second group. In 3 turns, the maximum number of orders they can have is 45, right? Um, and that's if
Yep.
they play a perfect game, which they're not going to because no one does. Um, so if we use this as our starting point, then it stands to reason that a really useful thing an ARO piece can do is basically like strip orders away from the opponent. Because a well placed ARO piece might say to your opponent, actually, you've got to spend 2 or 3 orders going around me instead of 1 order walking straight up to me. Um, and therefore, they might have started on 45 orders in total. That's 15 over 3 turns. But in practice, they might actually have much less to play with because they need to avoid your pieces. So does that make sense as a shift in idea?
Well, even if you're looking at 45 orders total,
Right.
every order you can strip is 2% of their game.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's a really nice way of thinking about it. So it's it's a big realization to have, and it changes the way that we approach ARO pieces because it means that things like mines, for example, become good ARO pieces. Why? Not because they're necessarily going to kill a troop, but because your opponent might spend an order walking around it, for example. And then, so while someone might look at a mine being relatively inexperienced and think, well, it doesn't present much of a threat, it's not doing anything. Of course, if let's just go and throw a mine on the table somewhere. Let's see here. Okay, cool. So, you know, if there's a mine like, oh, I don't know, let's say there's one here, right? And there's this console here, just nearby. Obviously,
Mhm.
if the opponent has to run a troop around the side here to deal with the mine, maybe by
Yeah.
shooting it or something, that's going to cost
Mhm.
them a couple of orders, right? Or if they even have to suicide a troop into the mine to clear it before their specialist can go and press this button here, then you've probably cost them an order or two, maybe even 3, and that's very useful. So
Well, plus if they suicide a troop, that's a future order you've just
right,
removed.
exactly. Which also this gets into how we think about aggression a little bit, which isn't what this class is about, but it does make it clear that suiciding troops on turn 1 is bad, because it's actually 3 lost orders instead of 1,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense, because you have that
Oh
kind
yeah.
of that multiplication effect that every order you lose early on in the game is actually worth more than 1 order as the game kind of
Yes.
progresses. And so, yeah, so when we reconceptualize AROs from killing enemy troops to wasting their time, it opens up our selections dramatically. Just out of interest, what faction do you normally play? Like, what's your favorite faction?
Normally play Ariana's TAC.
Oh, right, cool, right. So Ariadna have some amazing, like, kind of, I would class soft, medium, and hard ARO pieces, and I'll go into a couple of them. So let's have a little think about the different types of ARO piece first. So in this categorization system, what we're talking about is how much risk the ARO piece takes on and how difficult they are to remove. So what I personally like to think of ARO pieces this way, and when I say a soft ARO, I mean something like a mine, or maybe in Ariadne you have ambush camo, like the fake camouflage markers. You have, what else is there? I guess pieces of equipment in nomads, like mad traps and things like that, or crazy koalas. Um, Anything that can be placed on the board and essentially costs you um, n- virtually no resources to place. I would consider a soft ARO. They're usually not too difficult to shift, but they can kind of waste your opponent's time. So one example might be, you might have, I don't know, like a Liberto like here and a mine here. As we've kind of said, that's probably outside of 8 inches. Actually, it's not, it's 7. So the reason why a mine is a soft ARO is because it's quite temporary, right? It just lasts for a single kind of turn, and then if it gets shot, it's gone. If the opponent moves a troop into its kind of trigger area, it's gone.
Yeah.
Similarly with ambush camouflage in Ariadne, it's only there until it's discovered, then it just immediately disappears. Or if the troop reveals itself, I believe it disappears as well.
Yes, it disappears if they reveal.
Right. So, what are the advantages and disadvantages here? Well, the advantage of ARO pieces like this is that they cost you almost literally nothing. I think the mine layer skill is worth a point or two. Ambush camouflage probably similarly over normal camouflage. In terms of, are you exposing any of your troops to actual risk? No, not really. It's just a piece of equipment. It doesn't really matter to your game plan. So one of the most beautiful things about soft AROs is that you are forcing your opponent to spend resources on something that costs you very little. Okay. And if we think about what's a really, really good example of this, the Spetsnaz, right, in Ariadne. The Spetsnaz does this so well because everyone knows that the Spetsnaz has ambush camouflage, although as soon as I say that, I'm questioning myself. It always used to. And
Yes, the Spetsnaz and the Strelocks are the ones with ambush camouflage.
And so, here's the thing. If we just grab ourselves... is ambush camouflage in the box? I think it is.
Oh, we should make a note that by ambush camouflage we mean decoy now.
Oh, yeah, sure. Because it's
just for
something else.
Future.
You can tell that I've been playing the game for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Yes. So, I've grabbed myself a Spetsnaz and this camouflage. See, this is really interesting because you can legitimately put an ambush camouflage there, and your opponent might say, well, I need to respect the fact that this could be something. In all likelihood, it's probably not, but you need to respect the fact that it could be, something, and therefore they might perhaps, I don't know, like, let's say, for example, move an HMG piece up here to kind of take it on just in case it reveals. And, even if they do reveal it and it gets removed, they might have spent a couple of orders to move a piece up to deal with that, right? So you've basically traded nothing for something. If orders are a
Yes.
resource, you've done nothing, and it's cost your opponent something, essentially. Aside from the fact that ambush, camouflage, or decoy, costs you maybe a point or two, depending on the troop. So that's that example. We've spoken about mines. You just place them at bottlenecks, and obviously it costs your opponent a couple of orders to either move something that can dodge quite proficiently or to shoot it. So those are the soft AROs. They cost you almost nothing. They are reasonably easy to clear. They're not going to last very long, but they are not too risky for you, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So let's move on to the medium ARO pieces. Medium ARO pieces are things that expose you to a little bit of risk, but not a huge amount. And one of the best examples of this are Dailami in Hack-Islam. They are 6 points, which is unbelievable. They have infiltration. They have a single use camouflage, so they get camouflage for one use, and once they reveal, they're revealed. And they also get a shotgun and a Panzerfaust, which is very significant because it basically means that this 6-point troop can take on quite dangerous targets.
Yes.
Why is this considered a medium ARO? Because unlike the soft AROs, there is risk here. You do stand to lose an actual troop. 6 points isn't a lot, but it is something. It is an order. It's an irregular order in the case of the Dailami, but others might be a regular order. So, for example, in Nomads, you have the Jaguar, which is like a regular order person that has a Panzerfaust and does a very similar thing.
Yeah.
Are there any similar examples in Ariadne? I can't think of any in TAC.
I can't think of any in Ariadne that have that same role with the Panzerfaust.
Right.
Though in US Ariadne, there's the infiltrating grunts
100%,
with
yeah.
flamethrowers.
Yeah. That's exactly the kind of troop that I'm thinking about. And so I believe, if I remember correctly, that troop's in the region of 9 or 10 points, I think. Something like that.
Somewhere there. It's yeah. Line trooper cost.
Right. The lovely thing about the grunt as well lovely for you, is the fact that it has 3 armor, which is surprisingly useful. So what we're talking about with these troops is that you're taking on some small amount of risk. However, they are also harder to dislodge, right? If I played a test game on this map the other day, and I had... where did I put a Dailami? I think I had a Dailami here, I think. Something like that. And my opponent had a fire team here, in this area. And kind of pushed it up like this, and I took a shot with the Panzerfaust, which obviously exposed it to some risk, and it I think in the first shot, like, I got hit once by his HMG or something, but survived, and then he had to kind of keep the rest of the fire team back because he didn't want to expose a non-active member, so they were kind of lined up here behind this building, and the HMG was showing. Something like that, I can't remember, like, the precise situation. But the point was that, like, his movement became extremely inefficient because of this troop. Because he essentially was not playing to the full power of the fire team, because he couldn't expose all of his troops to that kind of risk. And the grunt fills a very similar role, right? If you land an infiltrating grunt somewhere like, I don't know, maybe around the side of this this bus kind of station or something, and then the opponent kind of either has to move around it, or you say, well, if you don't deal with it, I'm going to push in like this in my turn. Obviously, that's extremely dangerous. So the purpose of this is, I did expose it to risk. It could well have died, and I believe it did die after an order or two. But the point was, my opponent's movement became severely hindered. They couldn't expose the other 4 members of that core fire team. I lost a 6 point irregular order. Sure, no real harm done to my list. But they wasted about 2 or 3 orders, right? First order they couldn't move as far as they wanted. Second order I think they dealt with it, but they again couldn't expose the fire team because they didn't want to give me a normal roll rather than a face-to-face roll. And then third order they could finally move out. And so that's the idea with the medium ARO pieces is a little bit tougher, might take a little bit longer to shift, but not so many resources invested that that it's a significant loss when they die. It's also very usual for these kind of medium ARO pieces to be like your throwaway kind of infiltrators. So you've mentioned the Grunt, for example. I mentioned the Dailami, both like extremely similar troops. I can't think of too many other examples now. Well, I think about the Jaguar actually in Nomads. It doesn't have infiltration, but it's just very cheap, regular, and it has a Panzerfaust, and you're reasonably happy trading it away. So we can also think of them as trading troops. In some respects, you could argue that very cheap infiltrators with shotguns fill this role as well. This map actually isn't amazing at demonstrating skirmishers because it doesn't have any building interiors, but if we put this guy here, right, let's just say he's there. And just a bit of lag there, mate. And let's place him prone. Another job you can do with your medium ARO piece is, because you're not too afraid of losing it, you can just say, well, I'm just going to sit here with my shotgun, right? And I've made, like, this area kind of unsafe around here. Oh, why am I on the line tool? This kind of becomes a bit unsafe, and this kind of becomes a bit unsafe. And the opponent might walk along these catwalks up here to get to you. But if they do, you've got a guaranteed template, right? Because you have a shotgun. Which is something that the Grunt does very well with the flamethrower. So with these cheaper troops, you don't really mind trading them away, because sometimes you might trade away 6 points or 10 points, but threaten a troop that might be 15 points or 20 points or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
basic trading up.
Right, trading up. But also trading in role as well. If you're losing like a very cheap irregular order or something like that, and they're losing, I don't know, the equivalent of a Strelok or a Moran or, whatever it is, choose a reasonably cheap infiltrator, then obviously that's a good trade for you, because it's just more important to their list, right? And that's the beauty of these kind of medium ARO pieces with templates, is that they just force trades. They force trades really, really well if you place them in sensible places. Now, of course, if you're playing around templates, you want to kind of get those angles where you can't be seen from more than about 8 inches away. So you're looking for corners, stuff like this, maybe here, maybe up here. Where else would be good? Facing ladders can be quite nice, so if you are kind of tucked into this corner facing the ladder that's on the other side, that can be a reasonably good spot. Does that make sense? You want to cut down those angles.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, so you're just guarding like entryways. As I said, this map actually doesn't demonstrate this amazingly, because one of the best places for those trading template-based ARO pieces is the interior of a building. So covering a doorway is a classic example of this. Let's say, for example, if your opponent had to, I don't know, like cross through a doorway to get to this objective here, if that was a door there, then, putting a medium ARO piece like here could guarantee you a shotgun template if they came through, which is obviously really neat and really useful. So, just to recap, the soft ARO pieces, things like mines and equipment, you just want them to take up space and place them in those kind of angles where you expect troops to come around a corner and either have to face it or have some difficulty removing it. The medium ARO piece, it really depends on the weapon they have, but again, you don't want them overlooking too much. So taking on a corner is quite useful. A corner like this, for example. Or, as I showed in my game, I put my Dailami here, which does have a reasonably exposed fire lane. Like if I kind of zoom in, you can see you can kind of cover quite a lot, like all of this here. But at the same time, it's 6 points, so it's not the biggest risk in the world. So it just depends on the armament and what you want to do with it. That's the kind of simpler part of ARO pieces. The harder bit is the hard ARO pieces, the ones that take on the most risk. So these are things like your classic sniper. I think I pulled out Armand because he has Mimetism -6 and MSV1 and stuff, so he's a reasonably good hard ARO piece. And I also pulled out the Total Reaction Remote as well, because I think that's quite a classic one that a lot of people go for. So the aim of these pieces is to, in theory, you want to waste significantly more of your opponent's orders and time because they cost more points, right? So they're not just throwaway troops. And one of the tricks to this, in my mind, actually, is to think about which turn the game is in. And the reason why I say that is because I think that these hard ARO pieces don't do a very good job on turn 1. That's my own personal opinion. I think, you know, some people will disagree with that. But the reason I say it is because in turn 1, your opponent has all of their best pieces available. So they can just pick their HMG and just shoot your sniper, right? As I discussed with you before we started the stream, a sniper kind of standing up here, if it's the first turn, it's not really going to get a lot done, right? Because your opponent's going to pick their best piece, and then they have, you know, about 15,000 ways to deal with it, right? They can come up here, they can come around here, they can come around here. Like, it's not going to last very long, and it's arguably not going to waste too many orders. So, one of my personal perspectives on this is that sometimes what can be quite helpful is to have your skirmishers, the midfield troops, do some work in your first turn and then expose your ARO pieces in the second and third turn. Because, you know, when your opponent's gone from 10 orders down to, you know, 7 or 8, and maybe one of their HMGs has died and they've only got like a Spitfire left or something, then your sniper's going to be in a much better position. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Basically, you've limited what they can do to counter it before you expose it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also matchup dependent as well. So if I'm playing against Pano, to be completely honest with you, full disclosure, I don't put out ARO pieces. I might put out a Dailami or two, so, you know, in Ariadne terms, it might be the equivalent of a grunt or 2 grunts or something like that, but I'm not putting out a sniper. And people would say, well, you know, why aren't you setting up to ARO? Because, and my answer to that is because if my opponent's playing, you know, a BS15 tag that has 10 inches of movement in a single order and, you know, burst 5 or something like that, and I'm thinking of the hyper rapid magnetic cannon and BS15, it's just not worth it, right? What are you actually costing the opponent? Maybe 1 order, maybe 2. That's acceptable if you're throwing away 6 points. I think that's completely fine. But Armand over here is about 40 points.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, you kind of have to think, like, when your opponent tells you what army they're playing at the start of the game, have a think about, you know, what your acceptable kind of losses are and how easily they are going to find dealing with any of your ARO pieces. So what I mean by that is, as soon as my opponent says to me they're playing Pano, I think, okay, like, anything I leave exposed will die, because that's what Pano does. If they say they're playing Hak Islam, the faction that I play, I might think about leaving 1 or 2 things up, but again, I'm most likely to do it in the later turns once I've dealt with some of their pieces, because your ARO pieces can do disproportionately more damage when your opponent's options are limited. It's not just a simple thing. An HMG might deal with you in one order. A Spitfire might take 5, right?
Would have to get close enough to actually compete with the sniper rifle.
100%, yeah. It limits their approach angles. And, you know, bonus if you've got, say, you know, we can start thinking about layering arrows as well, right? Because we could say, well, you know, what if there's a Dailami with a shotgun like here? So, or actually maybe, I don't know, let's say it's, let's say it's where the Liberto is. Oh, it has a shotgun anyway, so that's fine. So, okay, your opponent's running out of long-range pieces, they want to deal with the sniper. Well, okay, they're probably going to want to do it from, like, here. Oh, that's not a very big thing. There. Or there. So you can layer a medium ARO piece here. You know, throw a shotgun there, so when they walk around, which they're going to want to do, you've got one piece here. And then, if they get to this corner, you've got your second piece here, in Armand, the sniper. So, that's a little bit about when to deploy them. And some people do disagree, like, you know, people do set up ARO pieces in the first turn. I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but I'm just saying you should consider where you're putting them and how long you're really expecting them to last. Because,
of course,
if you're expecting them to last more than an order or two and your opponent's playing quite a shooty faction, then, you know, I think you're arguably being a bit optimistic, to be honest with you. So what are they? They're more expensive troops, they're tougher troops. Armand here has Mimetism -6, so he's a bit harder to hit. The TR bot that I've selected here has total reaction, so it's a bit better at winning face-to-face rolls. Other troops might do this in different ways, so you could be a heavy infantry with a missile launcher. So I'm thinking of the Swiss Guard in Pano. It has like armor 4 or 5, 2 wounds, a missile launcher, Mimetism -6. It's extremely tough. What else is a good example? Ariadne. I used to play the Cataran, the Highlander Cataran, quite a lot. I think it has Mimetism, Climbing Plus, and a really nasty sniper.
Yes.
So, and that piece is, you know, kind of 20 points. It's moderately hard to hit. You can leverage the range bands, do that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't necessarily expose it on the first turn. Not every game. So let's talk a little bit about placement and how to maximize them. So, as I've already alluded to, sometimes the most exposed spot isn't the best spot because it gives your opponent so many angles to attack from. So instead, it can be good to cover perhaps more niche spots and also to leverage your range bands. So let's take the sniper first. It's too dangerous to cover the middle of the board on this map because we've seen that there are quite a few different ways to approach, and it's just going to get you killed quite quickly. So if I were playing, I might personally consider leveraging, you know, just a more kind of shallow angle here or something like that. Your opponent can still approach, but to do so, you know, they have to have committed to this side first of all. So it's up here or something like that, around here. Now, I've already eyeballed this, and I've said that this confrontation is going to be outside of 16. I was actually wrong. This is exactly 16. So I'd actually want to be a bit further back than this. So you're in a decent range. Notice, the reason why I picked this't that there aren't a ton of angles to attack from. You've basically got by the yellow car. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're covering this intersection.
Right. And is it a waste of time? Well, no, because there's this objective here. So it's not a waste of time. You are covering something. I did get the range band slightly wrong, to be honest with you. I thought this would be 16. It's actually like 15 and a bit. 16 to there. So that's my bad. It also makes it far easier to stack multiple AROs if you're just covering a short section. So you know that your sniper's probably going to be attacked from here. So hence you can also place, I don't know, you might want a shotgun behind one of the... Oop, I've just sent it flying. A shotgun behind one of these cars or trucks or around this corner or something like that. not the best position because they can probably see over the car, but you know what I mean. You can set up many more AROs, and that's easier to do because you're not covering the entire board. It's just a narrow angle. One of the most important tips I can give you, which you're going to find hard to do on most boards, but if you can do it, is amazing, is to try to engage from the maximum range you can, especially if you've got something like a sniper. I am kind of sad, and I have way too much free time, and I have run a lot of simulations on the dice calculator that calculates the face-to-face odds. And the active player always wants to maximize their ballistic skill, even if it maximizes your ballistic skill as well. So just to give you a situation to imagine, if your ARO piece has an HMG and your opponent has an HMG, they still want to engage you at 20 inches, even though it means you're both at +3 range. That's good for them. They want that. You, as an ARO piece, want to be shot at 33, the -3 range for both of you. I know that that means you're less likely to hit, but it also means they're less likely to hit too. Yeah. And after having looked at lots of different situations on the dice calculator, that does favour the reactive player. So you want to minimise the opponent's ballistic skill. And so when you're playing with a sniper, if you can possibly get out of 32, then that's great. Now, almost no boards are going to let you do this, but, you know, wherever possible, it is good. And so, you know, actually, if Armand was here later on in the game, right, so let's say it's turn 3, covering this angle right down the middle, that is really, really good. But it's just too risky to take early on because your opponent's going to have his own snipers and things like that. However, an HMG on -3 for range, -3 for cover, and let's say -3 for mimetism. Armand has -6, but let's just say -3 for mimetism. On -9s in total isn't going to get a lot done. Even if you're on 1s or 2s as well, it doesn't matter because we're going back to the core idea. The first thing I said was, what does an ARO piece want to do? It wants to waste time. And so an outcome where nothing happens is actually a win for an ARO piece. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes.
Right. So you like odds where nothing happens. If you both bounce off each other, fine, that's fantastic. Let's have another look at other places where we could go. So I've got the sniper here. So I think we've already said this is probably this is the early game trap spot, but the late game, you know, a bit more useful spot. We've talked about the side angle being arguably better, although after checking the range bands it is slightly too close. I'm idly wondering if there's anywhere else. I can't really see anywhere else. I didn't prepare this, by the way, I'm just looking at this board now. I've played one game, but I don't have too much experience on it. Let's have a look at the HMG. Where would you want to go with this? Now, same thing goes for the HMG. You might want to just take a kind of narrow angle. So let's say, I don't know, this is quite a conservative ARO spot here, right?
Yes.
It's not super liberal. You can't see loads of the board, but you're still covering an objective, right? The opponent's nearest angle is probably this corner, which I'm guessing is about 20. Yeah, it's about 18. There you go. So that's fine. That's decent for you. You can lay another ARO here if you wanted to. But crucially, again, you're taking a flank, so it means that the opponent's entire force isn't just going to be able to walk up and murder you immediately, right?
Yeah.
So that's quite
from
important.
Here, you cover this side's approach. Exactly. You don't cover this approach to it, but then you can
set something
layer
else
that
up
otherwise.
There. Right, so you could use... You don't want to take the widest angle with your hard ARO pieces because they're just too expensive and precious to do, but maybe you might want to throw away a Liberto or a Grunt or something, so maybe to make up for that it goes here, you know.
Yeah.
And then you've done a decent job. It's like, okay, your opponent has to spend 1 order here, maybe a second order here. If you're very lucky, perhaps a third. Then perhaps they get to the objective. Maybe they're coming from this angle here, and then maybe it takes a fourth order to deal with the bot. And suddenly, by this point, you're actually talking about half a turn, right?
Yes.
And that is kind of magical Christmas land a little bit, because they could just go for another objective, right? So they could just take this one instead.
Yes.
Fine, noted. That's okay. But you're still doing your job. You're making it harder for your opponent to take space, and you're occupying it yourself. It does also mean, consequently, that in your turn, you might find it a bit easier to get to this objective, because your opponent hasn't pushed there. So that's okay. Sometimes them not approaching is a good outcome, because it's clear for you to approach in your turn. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Basically, you're dictating how your opponent plays.
Yeah, exactly. ARO pieces can dictate the flow of the game, but if you're not careful, if you're careless with them, they don't really dictate anything, they just die. So that's that. Let's have a look. Where else could a TR bot go? Oh, there's a trick I can talk about in a minute as well, actually. Yeah. Any kind of ideas that you're seeing yourself to place one? An HMG?
You picked the first spot I was looking at.
That one there, yeah.
I almost want to try here.
Right.
But I think that fire lane is too long for it.
So maybe late game, if you wanted to waste the opponent's time, here might be okay. Because you're just saying, well, I'm going to miss, but you're going to miss as well. Sure, that's okay.
Actually, I take that back. That is a good length for him.
Right. And so the difficulty with this position here is merely that there is an angle here. Boop, like that.
Okay.
Which is about 6. It's probably less than 16. Yeah, that's like 14. But again, as we've said, we can correct that, right? Because it might be as simple as just saying, well, maybe I throw a shotgun round here, or something like that. I'm not.
Yeah.
Again, as I said, I haven't prepared this, so I'm sure there are better or worse spots to put your shotgun, but you can always lay your AROs. Right, what else is there to think about? We need to think a little bit about AROing for combat jump and parachutist and stuff like that. One little trick that you may not know about that's really helpful is that if a troop, let's say, doesn't have 360, I know TR bots have 360 visor, so it's a bit moot on him. A troop placed on the baseline should be able to see any other troop that walks on the back of the board, theoretically. So if you compare these silhouettes, can you see how, if this S2 walks on, it is in line of sight of this silhouette 3?
Yeah.
And so a flash pulse remote that sits on your home line will get an instant ARO if someone walks on into your deployment zone. There are only a couple of models in the game that can do this, one of which is immune to flash pulses, ironically. Well, not ironically. But the thing is, they all tend to be quite deadly, so it can be a good idea just to leave, a simple kind of rifle troop or something on the back line, because I can guarantee, because of the geometry of the silhouettes, they will get an immediate ARO as soon as someone walks on there. The other thing just to think about is turning your basic line infantry into medium ARO pieces by covering the sides with them. So I've just grabbed a basic Hack Islam infantry. The Ghulam has a rifle, has a shotgun. You probably don't want to expose yourself to this long line here. That would probably be quite bad. But, I don't know, maybe you want to... Is this taller? Yeah, so maybe you just want to cover the side, right? Someone walks on, comes round. Well, you've got a shotgun, so that's decent. This range is probably about 10 or so. Yeah, it's 10.5, so that's not great for a shotgun, but it's okay for a rifle. And if they come any closer, they will be in template range. So when I'm building a list, even my order providers are ARO pieces, but just in a very niche way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just limiting those little spots that you couldn't have protected with your major ones.
Right. Yeah, and Ariadne are really good for this because they've got a bunch of like 5 to 10 point dudes with chain rifles, and they love being in a spot like this. Just throw them here. If anyone walks around, you are so happy to trade 5 to 10 points for whatever aggressive, like 30-point troop has walked around the side. That's a good trade.
Yeah.
So you can co-opt different roles. Instead of just being an order provider, it can be an order provider and an ARO piece. Similarly, on this other side of the map, when I was playing the other day and had a look briefly, I just had one here. And again, the opponent walked around actually in this case, and I did get a shotgun shot, and it was just quite profitable. So that's a little bit about placement. So I've discussed the fact that an S2 or S3 on the rear line can see any troop that walks on, just useful to bear in mind. And I've talked about the fact that you want to be covering some of the acute angles on the edges, because the thing about these are, they're very easy to cover with things with a chain rifle or a shotgun, but they're completely disastrous to miss if you have nothing there, right? Because
yes,
the potential cost of not having a single troop here could be enormous. So, the only thing I think I haven't been super clear about so far is about the placement of the hard ARO pieces, and the reason for that is because I genuinely can't find many very long spots on this board, to be honest with you. I wonder if... Actually, this is going to stretch me a little bit, but why don't I just load up a different map and we can just have a look together?
Yeah, that's fine.
It does sometimes take quite a long time to look at these things, but it's really good practice to just have a look at boards. So let's say... Sure, I've never seen this map before, so I'm just going to load it up and we'll have a look together and see what we make of it. These are all from the Season 5 maps. Oh, fancy. This is super fancy.
Oh. Interesting.
Although it hasn't loaded the ships quite correctly. Maybe they'll appear in a second. Okay, interesting. So, now, this is a very different map, because you can actually see there are some sightlines that are really long.
Yeah.
So, a reasonably throwaway piece might want to take something like, let's see, something like this, prone, and draw all the way across, because if it's prone, I guess it could see over to that green van all the way on the other side.
Yeah.
Ah, there you go, the ships have loaded. I would be happy to do that with a cheaper troop. With a sniper, I guess my eyes immediately drawn to... Should I put the grid on so we can have a look, actually?
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
Where's the third one? 4, 8, 12 here. Okay. Let's see. See, that's very risky, but if there was a way to kind of climb up or to be prone here and then pop up, that might be useful. Okay, so Silhouette 2 is actually taller than all of these barrels, so you actually have a reasonably nice sightline all the way to the other side. And what I'd be tempted to do, so I can see, for example, like across here. Am I in 2D or 3D? I'm in 3D, yeah. Which is quite long, and I can see over here as well. And what I'd be tempted to do is maybe be prone in the first turn and then stand up in the second. And try and maximise the range. You could even go further back. You could go back here, actually. Give yourself another inch or two. Cover slightly less then, of course.
Yeah. But also less exposed.
Exactly, exactly. Which is, what's worth bearing in mind. And so... and this top area is quite exposed, so I'd be thinking about using the grunts, the things like, if you wanted, let's say... peak chain rifle here, right? That kind of thing is great. Maybe... I don't know, maybe you could throw like a flamethrower like round here or something, just using those kind of narrow angles. And then setting your hard ARO pieces to the immediate kind of far edge so that they can just take those longest shots. So that's kind of soft, medium and hard AROs really. Talked a bit about placement, talked a bit about what they are. Do you have any specific questions that I kind of haven't addressed, or anything that I can go into more detail
on? Obviously, one of the biggest challenges is finding the right balance, but I think you've talked about that a fair bit.
So, everyone, when you say balance, do you mean list building or play? Or...
balance and placement of how much do I see versus... Because that's how much they can see me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how much do I cover versus how much do I expose myself?
So I ask myself two general rules, two general questions. The first is, am I actually covering something important? So is what I'm doing relevant? Because obviously if it's not relevant, it's not worth doing. Okay. So another way of putting it is, what am I actually achieving here? Right. And if the answer to that question is nothing, then don't do it. And then the second question is, how many approaches does my opponent have to shoot me? Is it 5? Is it 2? Is it 1? And with a hard ARO piece, you kind of want it to be in the region of like 2, maybe 3. So if it was here, the opponent could... the pen's just being a bit funny. They could theoretically approach from like here, but that's not going to happen, right? As long as your deployment zone's covered, so that's fine. They can approach from here, over on the other side. Well, that's okay, because it's probably quite a long angle. I think we've already measured that to be... Yeah. So back here is 33. That's great. Closer, 29, but, you know, if they're not careful, you'll get the shot off before they hit them. So they'd need to be a bit careful. And then I think they also have one here as well, as far as I can see. I'm probably missing things, because as I said, I've never seen this map before in my life. Let's see, have I missed anything? No. And then obviously the difficulty on this map is the second tier up here, which does open another angle, but again, I would be surprised if this wasn't... Yeah, I mean, this is about 20 inches up to here as well, so that's not that bad, and you can cover it with a... you can cover it with a soft or a medium piece, so like a mine could be here or something like that. So my general rule of thumb is like, in the first couple of turns, you probably don't want to see too much, you might not want to take on too much risk. As the opponent gets whittled down, they have fewer orders and fewer pieces to choose from. I might be a bit more bold, and when I say a bit more bold, that might look like, I don't know, standing something up here. Not a rifle, obviously not a rifle. And the reason why I've made that decision is because if the opponent doesn't have many orders, then each order that I waste is worth a little bit more to me. So my assessment changes as the game goes on, basically. Yeah. And so in terms of list building, I think one of the things just to finish on is to say that everyone builds their list differently. But I find that it's quite important to include quite a good number of soft and medium AROs. So if I was playing Ariadne, you know, I would look at including things like, you know, chasseurs, the French troops with the flamethrowers in camouflage. Lots of them. Yeah. They're a really nice medium ARO piece. They're moderately expensive, but you don't need to throw them away. You can just cover a side angle, you know, so you could be up here or something with one. I think it's really important to have lots of that, because it's one of the most effective ways to slow down your opponent is by just covering those short angles and threatening templates. That's really good. And then in terms of hard ARO pieces, I usually include about one. And I tend to... Personally, I like snipers. Some people like total reaction remotes. Other people don't include any, but they'll look to put something into suppressive fire, which can be quite effective, depending on the troop that you've chosen and things like that. So that's my kind of general rule. One thing I would say that I was told by a really good player once was that the active turn is quite easy, right? In the active turn, you get to pick the circumstances of the shootout. You get to pick the range, and you get to pick the gun, and you get to pick the troop, right? So the active turn, you don't need to worry about that much. But what you do need to worry about a little bit more is the reactive turn. And there are lots of benefits to doing so because, you know, you can potentially waste the opponent's time without spending any orders, and that's incredibly powerful. So some people I know like to actually build their list with the reactive turn in mind, and the way they do that is by including a lot of mines, a lot of template weapons, and then like one or two very good hard ARO pieces. And by very good I mean like, you know, something with mimetism -6 and MSV and a sniper. You know, like a kind of O12 Epsilon, I guess. That was just an example off the top of my head. Perhaps, what's another example? Kamau, I guess, is a good example of that in Pano. We talked about the Cataran in Ariadna. So, yeah, so the reactive turn presents quite a lot of opportunity, but it's quite difficult. But you can build into it by including lots of camouflage, lots of mines, deployables, and kind of things like that. And that's kind of it for now, unless you've got any other questions to add.
I thought of one other question. Talking about the soft arrows and mines.
Yeah.
Obviously, mine layer is the best to go for because it doesn't involve an order. How do you balance lane mines because they expend your own orders versus the orders that mine may take up for your opponent?
Yeah. So when you are laying a mine to waste the opponent's time, one of the things that's helped me most is just to ask myself how many orders will it take my opponent to reach this mine. And also, of course, is it in a place that the opponent needs to reach in the first place, right? Because if the opponent doesn't need to go there, don't do it. But let's give an example. So let's say this is a mission where you need to press these buttons up here. So we want to cover this. All right, let's try and find a place that's relevant for a mine. I guess here is quite tempting, but your opponent can approach from the other side and just avoid it. This is outside of 8 inches. Yeah, it's just about outside. So that would be a bit touch and go, actually, because if I remember correctly, the small template is 8.5, if I remember correctly. Yeah. That's very touch and go. So when I eyeballed that, I thought I might not put a mine there. But on the other hand, this one seems much better, because you could get a mine, like, I don't know, just on the edge or something. And then it's obviously going to hit. And so that's the first thing. Am I laying a mine in a place where the opponent needs to go? If yes, move on to step 2. And step 2 is, how many orders is it going to cost my opponent to get to this mine? If the opponent is running, you know, some kind of motorcycle, like, or an impetuous warband thing, and they merely need to spend an impetuous order to reach the mine, I wouldn't do it, because it's not really a resource. You know, they just move up and they either dodge or they, you know, just die. And if it's, you know, if it's like a 10-point warband, it doesn't matter, really. If, however, let's say, for example, you know, your mine is here and the opponent's warband is, like, over here, and the only other troop nearby is a specialist, let's say they've got a forward observer or something here, then I might say to myself, well, it's worth going for the mine, isn't it? Because at absolute worst for me, that specialist has to discover and shoot the mine, right? At worst. At best, they don't risk the specialist, and they move this this imaginary warband all the way over. Let's say it takes 2 orders or 3 orders. Yeah, that's about 6. So, I mean, immediately we're talking about 2 orders just to do that. And then they blow it. That's a profitable trade for you, because you spent 1 order on the mine and they spent, like, a couple of orders moving over. So, what helped my game most was just asking myself, how many orders is it going to take my opponent to reach this mine and deal with it? If the answer to that is 1, I don't do it. If the answer to that is 2 or 3, I do it. And what makes it easiest is if I look in the surrounding area and my opponent doesn't have a ton of troops available, like they just have 1 or 2 options, because that's when things really get quite stretched for them.
Yep.
The second answer to that question is, of course, you can coordinate your mines and place 3 or 4 at once, which becomes very, very good. You can also coordinate a recamouflage as well if you want to. It becomes quite command token intensive, but you can do that. You can coordinate the mine and coordinate recamouflage, which is
that's been one of my goals to pull off in a game.
Yeah, you can definitely.
I haven't
do
done
that
it yet.
In Ariadne. I'm sure you can do it in Ariadne. There must be like so many options for that.
Yeah.
So, would I put a mine next to my opponent's Fizz 13 warband? No, probably not. But would I put it next to their Fizz 10 skirmisher? Yeah, probably. You know, because like that troop's probably reasonably expensive. It might be a specialist, and it's just going to be a bit harder for them to deal with. So just count out the orders in your head and just be like, you know, how costly actually is it for my opponent?
Okay.
Does that answer that reasonably well?
Yes, that gives some help at figuring out where to judge the balance. Yep.
One of the things that's changed my game the most in terms of both AROs, but also in the active turn as well, is just preempting and counting out orders in your head and just saying, okay, you know, my opponent's at the bottom of the stairs. It's going to take them like maybe 1 or 2 to get to here. Measure it up. Yeah, that's about 8 inches. That's an order. Maybe they want to get to here. Okay, well, they'll probably go to here and hide. So that's maybe an order. Then maybe they kind of reach the edge and they discover and shoot the mine. So perhaps we're talking 2 to 3. You know, so I just kind of roughly plan out like how long it's going to take for things to happen. Even if you're out, it doesn't matter. It just gives you a very rough idea of how much time you're wasting of theirs. Cool. Yeah, I can't really think of much else. So I've talked about how the ultimate goal of an ARO piece is to waste time, not to kill enemy troops. And I've talked about how we can classify our ARO pieces into soft, medium, or hard, depending on how resource intensive they are for us to take in the list, and how risky it is for them, you know, how many resources we're expending if we lose them. Where soft is something that costs us virtually nothing, and hard is something that costs us like loads of points. We're maybe talking like 30 to 40 points potentially. Obviously your soft ARO pieces you can kind of take a lot of in a list and you lose very little. So they're reasonably low risk. Whereas the hard ARO pieces, the things that cost a lot of points, you want to be quite conservative with, and don't feel the need to expose them on turn 1 if there's no good reason to do so. Sometimes you might be playing a mission like Capture and Protect, where you have to kind of protect a beacon just on the edge of your deployment zone, something like that. In which case, you know, maybe you need to leave a hard ARO piece out, or you might lose the game, potentially. And but just think about it, like, is this hard ARO piece achieving something? If it is, then yeah, you know, maybe do it. But if it's not, just leave it hidden. Wait till turn 2, turn 3, you know? And then we just talked a little bit about order efficiency and how it can be useful just to count out orders and things like that. That's about all I can think of. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. Alright, well, I think I will leave it there for this one and stop the stream.
Okay.
Yeah, I am just going to give it another couple of seconds because the streaming stuff sometimes cuts off the last 30 seconds or so, which is great.